Well, I would like to start off by thanking everyone present here in the ASOCOPI Congress. I am Mónica López-Ladino. I'm going to introduce my academic background. I have been a teacher for 15 years. Currently, I am an English high school teacher in a public school in Medellin. Also, I am a professor for the MA in Learning and Teaching Processes in Second Languages at Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana. I teach the Literacy Second Language Seminar, and also I advise in-service teachers in the process of research in the program. I am a researcher at the Literacies in Second Language project. In this, I am a member of LSOP Advisory Board. Well, so today I'm going to share with you this pedagogical experience called Multiliteracies and English language learning during pandemic times. This pedagogical experience took place in Institución Educativa Luis López de Mesa in Medellin. It is the result of all my interest in taking action when education setting started to change due to the pandemic. All kinds of difficulties came out for students, parents, and educators, but I felt the need to do something for my students because life goes on. So I know all of us around the globe were called to use teachers' agency and emergency responses. We attempt to create learning environments that facilitate knowledge transfer and interaction, and so to solve problems through self-help and support from colleagues, although many teachers struggle with insufficiently developed digital competence and connectivity issues. Well, through this presentation, I aim to share with you how I use theory to adapt and innovate in my teaching practices when the pandemic started. So, this is what we're gonna do during this presentation. I'm gonna introduce the scenario. I'm gonna talk about the theoretical background, specifically pedagogical multiliteracies. Also, how I work multiliteracies in the English class, and some final considerations. Well, so talking about the S scenario, I mentioned there is a public school in Medellin City. We have students from 6, 9, 10, 11, I mean, the ones that I teach, 6, 9, 10, and 11 graders. It was this pedagogical experience took place since the last year and during this year too. We have students from strata 1, 2, and 3. The English level could be A2 and A1 and A2 for 6th graders and graders. But later in 10 and 11 graders, we have ones that are acquiring B1 and B+. We have in our school around 700 students, and as all Colombian schools, we also have socioeconomic issues. Here we have a normal, a normal English class. Let me share the video with you. But later, pandemic started, and the educational setting immediately changed. So particularly in this school, we started working with Google Classroom. So we were struggling to master technology. We have lack of internet connectivity or technological devices. We have also the situation that some students do not have computer at home, or some family just have one cell phone, and there were like 3 or 4 siblings. We know that all of Colombians were facing economical issues. Besides, we also face students absenteeism and disengagement, right? Some students didn't continue the educational process. Also, we know that we have in our schools mental health issues, not just the students, but parents, but educators. Also, educators, we evidence of poor learning autonomy for our students. Some of them were missing a lot of the class and also the interaction with teachers and classmates. We agree as a school to work with DBA, Derechos Básicos de Aprendizaje. That was like a consent for all teachers. And we will have synchronous sections, class recordings, and printed material for students without internet connectivity, right? But at that time, I was like wondering what to do to engage my students, because the distant education learning conditions were difficult. And in my mind, the constant question was what to do about it. What can I do to engage my students? I felt the need to act purposefully to support all of them. So I strongly believe that social transformation only happens when we think constructively. So I was demanded to act. Well, so I use what I know at that moment, and it's something related with my teacher training and my research interest, that is literacy and multimodality. So I decided to use that theory to do something about it. I use the literacy concept more from the social perspective, reading the word and the word according to Freire and Maceo proposed. So in that way, students are code-breakers, meaning makers, and text users. In this way, literacy is a social practice. So I can take this concept for helping my students working at home when working in this distance education learning conditions. And I say, okay, this is something that I can do. This is something that I can start, or that can continue working with my students from home. Also, I understood multimodality as the integrations of modes, sample, sound, color, text, images, as resources for sending a message. With this idea in my mind, I go beyond the traditional writing text. I wanted to go beyond of asking my students for writing sentences in English, for writing a paragraph, or things like that, or just for completing a guide, or for completing a worksheet, for completing the printed material, and that's it. So I want is that my students start using other ways to reading and writing in the English class. So multimodal compositions use modes or similarity resources to communicate a message, and that's an idea that I introduced it to my classes. So in that way, my students can use linguistic, visual, audio, gestural, and spatial codes or symbols to set a message, not just by writing sentences or writing a paragraph. And also, the multiliteracies concepts that I introduced at this time seek to transform the literacy class into a space where students develop a deep understanding of the socio-cultural realities while developing the tools to transform the world. and that was where we living. We were living a social cultural reality around the globe, and we need to do something with that. So, in other words, the pedagogy of multiliteracies suggests supplementing the traditional emphasis on reading and writing. I mean, letter sounds, sentences, uh, like at the traditional text, right? Something related to literature or things like that. The idea is to supplementing that for new forms or with new forms of multimodal text design that integrate the different modes of representing within languages. So in that way, my students will feel comfortable with working with English at home. They were not like just based on grammar activities or like a feeling that they do not understand English and they do not have somebody to ask, right? Because the idea is not just like a parent's work on the homework, but students to produce their or to construct their own learning. Well, so for continue explaining about multiliteracies, we need to have clear that today literacy practices are increasingly social in nature. They are more participatory, where users get to produce content and layer it as multiple modes, resources, and media come into play to create complex messages. So in that way, we understand that our students can create presentations, can create posters, can create TikToks, YouTube videos, can post in Facebook, Instagram. So we were talking also about reading and writing through social networks. And there are different literacies, digital literacies that are also surrounding us. So we are gonna use them for working in that time and also nowadays because we continue with this emergency. So we also need to understand that when working with the pedagogy of multiliteracies, we need to identify four major dimensions. They are also called acts or knowledge processes. So we need to experiencing the known and the new, conceptualizing by naming and by theory, analyzing functionality and critically, and applying appropriately and creatively. Well, so those four dimensions of multiliteracies encourage students to transform and make new meanings out of the different texts and not just to reproduce what others express. So here the idea is to elicit my students to build their own text. When we talk about experiences, according to Copenhagen, is like when you involve mixing familiar and unfamiliar texts and experiences. In that way, we know that students first construct texts multimodally, but schooling reverts to monomodal text. So in that way, we are, as English teachers, start asking for grading sentences and paragraphs and finally essays. So in this experiences process, the first thing that one must navigate is the tension that proposing a multimodal and simultaneous. So we need to start like guiding them to what is that, because at the first beginning they were like a multimodal composition. What is that? Maybe my English teacher is asking for something that is even more complicated, but it's not. We need to explain them that. And also we got conceptualizing. That this process of conceptualizing involves introducing students to the notion of multimodality. So we need to start explaining them what are the modes that they can use, what are seniority resources that we have to yes, to use them for create a message or to send a message. Also, we have in those stages analyzing and applying. According to Copenhagen, define analyzing as the process where learners interrogate the interest behind a meaning or an action and their own processes of thinking. Applying, on the other hand, entails in producing ideas and producing the text. So in this experience, in this pedagogical experience, we have that both analyzing and applications are current to the creation of multimodal text. We are going to create multimodal text using a strategy that I call English Helps Me Grow, also the bilingual news and the newspaper, the school newspaper. So here when we say that the process of analysis is the moment when students encounter looking for collecting and creating the semiotic resources they will need and organizing their multimodal text. This is also the moment when students become acquainted with digital and multimodal tools they will need, such as video recorders, cameras, and audio editing and video making software, but also as something as simple as color pencils, pencil, and a piece of paper, right? Well, so now I will share how I frame those 4 knowledge processes in multiliteracies as moments in my classroom activities. So I create a school scenario for the pedagogy of multiliteracies, which promotes the understanding of information and the design of meaning using modes. What I pretend with those class activities was to engage my students in more participatory literacy practices. In that way, my students were using and learning the English language. So I encourage children engagement through 3 main strategies for class activities. English helps me grow, Luis Lopez de Mesa bilingual news, and also the school newspaper. So here we have the activity English helps me grow. Basically, this strategy arises at the beginning of the quarantine when teachers were demanded to create resources to study at home. And I was like, if I'm going to create something for working at home, are my students interested in simple present, simple future, or progressive or continuous tenses? Are they interested in knowing vocabulary about environment, things like that? So I was like thinking that I need to avoid the pressure of learning English without face-to-face classes. So this strategy encourages students to develop social emotional skills at the time they learn English language by creating multimodal text. So it was the first time I introduced the concept of multimodality to my students. So I explored a different instruction, and also I conceptualized when explaining them what is multimodality. The idea or what I wanted it was to transmit calm, security, and confidence to step up student self-esteem to facilitate English language learning, right? So here we have some examples of my students' working with multimodality. They were like in the very beginning, like using colors, using different kinds of fonts, understanding that the spatial distribution is also important in the way that we create text. Also, the idea of having arrows, clouds, or circles, or things for organizing and distributing the text, and also the importance of including visuals and symbols, right? So here we have different kinds of activities: my worry club, when I say good student, my self-care plan, and also like writing tests about presenting the house. Another class activity that I did for work in multiliteracies was the school news. And let me tell you that this project was presenting during the English Day in front of all the school community during what we call Acto Cívico for the English Day. But now that we were starting the lockdown, the pandemic, so we need to evolve and to use the, to transform the school news in real life in the digital format. So it is spread through the English area YouTube channel and school's Facebook. It is recorded and edited by students. We have 6 broadcasts since we started the lockdown until now, and more broadcasts are coming, right? So the rest of the year. And this project or this classroom activity started by being modeled by teachers. So the first emission or the first broadcast was made by the English teacher at our institution, like showing students that we can be at home, but we have some tools that we can use for communicating. And also we started inviting 11 graders, 10 graders, 9 graders, all the students that want to do it. The idea is that they feel comfortable when working with those videos, with those sections, that they feel they can learn English, they can speak in English. That sometimes we need to avoid those myths that related to pronunciation. So we need to empower our students to raise their voices, to make them know that they can do a lot of things when they propose it. So all of those things were done during the lockdown or during this year when we started also the alternative processes. So in that way, I also used multiliteracies for dimension that are experiencing, because this was something new for them, like recording something from home, then editing and convert it in the school news or the bilingual Lopez Domesa bilingual news. Also conceptualizing, that is the understanding of multimodality, and finally analyzing and applying, that is when we got the videos. Also we got a third element, a third English class activity, the school newspaper. This project is led by Spanish teachers, and thanks to teachers' collaboration, English area got a section in the newspaper. So this was the first time that Spanish and English got together. They started working as the humanities area that we are. So we started participating using multimodal composition. It was amazing because it was the first time that we, as humanities area, worked together to produce a newspaper in both languages. Because sometimes when we are talking about the school newspaper, they just presented in Spanish articles, Spanish production, but no English. And also we have to change that idea of presenting a text in English in like an essay. But this time we were participating with multimodal text, and it was an activity that catch everybody's attention. We have different posts here, and we have also different versions of this school newspaper. We use the Genially platform for creating it like in a more interactive way. The kind of tests produced by students were, as I mentioned, multimodal compositions. So we have here some examples of what students did. they were involved in different modes. Some of them also integrate audio and the spatial distribution, the colors, the fonts, stickers, things that they were using nowadays. And that was an excellent opportunity to understand that our students are raising their voices, are producing text, are not just consuming text, but they are also presenting their ideas. So here we have the analyzing and applying dimensions of the pedagogy of multiliteracies. Well, so also I want to mention that as a result, this scenario creates an intrinsic connection with today's ways of communication, right? We were using cell phones, videos, using stickers, using WhatsApp, using different kinds of things that we have. And I mentioned also that we have students that work with printed material. So also those printed material, I took the photos and I posted in the bilingual news in the also I mean in the in two ways. I took the pictures for the printed material, so I digitalized the products, and some of them were posted in the newspaper, and some of them were presented in the bilingual school news. Well, so this is basically what we did, and I want to share with you some final considerations. I think that is that after explaining all of this or sharing this idea with you, is my intent to make a call to teachers' agency and to consider English language learning as a social practice, right? So we are able to write tests, students are able to construct the tests according to the topics that are surrounding. Another thing that I forgot to mention is that the topics about those things, about those works, were related to the transversal topics of the suggested curriculum by the men. So all those topics were like working together, they were integrated. I was working with DBA, yes, of course, but I continue working with the transversal topics. So it was quite interesting for students like using or talking, writing, and learning about democracy and peace, health, sustainability, and also about globalization, right? So that were so up-to-date topics. Also, it's important to keep in mind the empowerment and agency with and through technology. The idea is not just like bring technology to the classroom because is that what we need to do? No, the idea is like well, sometimes we have it, sometimes we do not have it. But what can I do to use it, or just to, yes, for being a vehicle for working and learning English, right? And another thing is that those kind of activities help me to change a student's perception toward learning, toward English language learning. Because in that way, they were not feeling like I cannot speak in English, I don't understand the audios, I don't know how to write sentences in English. But in this way, they feel like, yes, you can. I can do it. I can build text in English. I can express myself in English. So that's another particularity of all this work. Also, another thing that I want to point out is to understand students as multimodal text readers and multimodal text writers. To include multimodality as a ways to create text. So for this, it's important to keep in mind the three key elements of multimodal designs as the basis to ensure a success multimodal text. Multimodal text is not just because it is a video, so that's multimodality. No. Or just because it has a lot of colors, that's multimodality. No. So we need to understand that the first element is intention, or thinking who's one's audience and will be and whose one is trying to reach with the message. The second element is meaning, or the consideration of what one ultimately wants to say. And the final element is design, or the careful selection of summary resources, the modes, to make the message as powerful as possible. So when I work with my children, with my students, I carefully design multimodal text that helps writers realize that the picture needs 1,000 words to go with it, but it also needs moving images, sounds, music, icons, and other forms of representation to create the richest and the most complex messages possible, right? And another thing that I want to point out is that those kind of activities are just like a way to show participatory literacy practices that evidences social transformation when crossing traditional boundaries about reading and writing in the English language. So here we are taking our students to realize that they are code breakers, meaning breakers and text users. They are living that literacy practice. And that's basically what I want to share with you in this time. Like, yes, trying to become that teacher that understands the context and the situation of students and try to face it with propositively, try to do something about, to act. So, well, I also would like to share with you some things like about getting in contact. I want to say thank you so much for being here, listening this presentation. So once again, I would like to thank everyone to be here. It was a pleasure to share with you my work on multiliteracies and English language learning during pandemic times. Well, so here there are some possible ways to contact me if you want to continue exploring or asking questions about this presentation. Well, see you. It was a pleasure. Goodbye.